again, we're a couple of meeple who are raising a fleet of pigs / stuck deep in a mine full of rubies. Nevertheless, let's talk about Caverna, the cave farmers, Uwe Rosenberg's giganto box of painted wood follow-up to the ubiquitous Agricola.
Where do we even begin with this one? I mean, dwarves. I love dwarves.
Yes, I know you do, because you are one. They're your people.
Yeah, I know. My kindred spirits.
Before we get to the dwarves, let's maybe start with the box.
And how massive it is.
Oh my god. I have never seen a board game box. Like, it's huge. And I've seen boxes that big before, but usually, like, there's a lot of wasted space inside.
Oh, not an inch of wasted space. Not a micro, millimeter.
It's like a cubic brick of cardboard and wood.
Yeah.
I feel like an alpine forest was destroyed for every copy that they made.
If you ever need, like, a blunt, heavy object to hit someone over the head with, just grab, well, don't take Caverna because it's such a great game. You wouldn't want to, ruin the box. But this thing is heavy.
Let's talk about what the game is about. It is a game about raising a family of dwarf farmers and miners by developing your fields and caverns with crops, rooms, animal pens, animals, and
dwarf babies! Dwarf babies. How cute. I love dwarf babies. Actually, I just love dwarves. Anyway. I get so excited. So each turn you can take one of your dwarves that you have and place it on one of the available action spaces, and then as the game goes on you'll actually turn over a new card, and that's going to give you more actions as the game goes on.
Yeah, so in that way it's kind of like a worker placement game. You take your dwarf, you put him on the action board, and do whatever the space that you put him on says, and typically those spaces will have resources on them for you to take and take an action, or will allow you to put new rooms or farm tiles onto your player board, or a combination of those things.
So it's a lot of worker placement plus resource management, because once you get those resources from after you've placed your dwarves on those specific action spaces, you can take those and get rooms, or exchange them for food, or victory points.
A lot of
whatever.
options.
Yeah.
And that's where this game kind of opens up. You can focus on any number of things. You can focus on gathering resources and earning points and trading those resources in for other things. You can focus on developing your cave or your fields, one or the other, or both. You can focus on gathering animals and having like a giant farm. You can focus on putting together combinations of rooms that you put into your cave to like enhance your abilities, whatnot. So in essence, the game is a sandbox. It's a sandbox in that you have the freedom to develop your own strategy out of many viable strategies for points that you get at the end of the game to be competitive to win.
Right.
And it doesn't feel like anything is unbalanced. Like, there's so many options. When you first start playing the game, and we started first playing the game, we were like, screw the simple rules. We're going to go full game right out of the box. And I was just like, what do I do first? I have no freaking clue what the best course of action is here. But after you play it the first time, you get a sense of how the game flows, and then you can kind of explore all the options you have that are available to you. And I think every time we've played, at least, I have always chosen a different focus for my strategy and had fun equally.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've actually never played Agricola, but we hear it's amazing.
And in fact, this is my first Uwe Rosenberg game.
Oh, yeah, mine too.
Yeah.
So we're joining some kind of crazy club, I think. But so what we do understand of Agricola is that what's different from Agricola with Caverna is that as one of your actions that's available to you, you can forge weapons, and that allows your dwarf to go on like expeditions. And then as you go on more expeditions, you level up, you get more like experienced in what you're doing. And then when you go on an expedition in the future with that dwarf, it actually opens up a separate they have like a little card that you can look at, and you get different resources based on what level you are.
Yeah, it's kind of like a grab bag kind of. You can choose a bunch of different like rewards basically. I surmise that your dwarf found like a donkey while he was out like adventuring or something like that. But that's one of the like new mechanisms from Agricola, and actually in this game it's interesting because, like I said, it's a sandbox. There's lots of different options. The forging of weapons and going on expeditions actually sort of balances the game out. Like if I take a spot on the action board that you really wanted it, but you have a dwarf that can go on expeditions, you can kind of make up for the fact that you could be blocked off of spots. And that whole expedition system allows you to sort of shore up areas where you maybe need some help in, or balance out your strategy versus someone else's. Because if you reach the max level with expeditions, you can basically get anything in the game when you take that action.
including placing tiles on the board and all that. So it does get pretty important, but it is pretty expensive. You have to pay 1 ore, I think, per level at the very beginning.
When you forge his weapons,
when you first forge the weapons, and then the only other way to increase it is to continue to go on expeditions. So you kind of have to keep going on that space. And you want to do that as a strategy.
And you have to place that dwarf last in the turn order, meaning you can't play him up front. So someone else could grab the expedition spaces, and he kind of can't do anything except take a normal action, which balances the game out in terms of using expeditions to just get everything you need and not doing anything else.
Right. Unless you have a ruby, and then you can play it out of order.
Right, and that's the other way, is rubies allow you to sort of bend some of the rules that bend other rules. So it's like this sort of like domino effect of like the ability to like do what you want on your turn. You never feel like you can't do the thing you want to do. There's always a way to get there.
Right.
The other great thing is that everything in this game awards you points. It gives you points at the end of the game, whether you have a ton of animals, whether you have lots of rooms, whether you have rooms that give you bonus points for having other types of rooms or animals. There's a room that you can get. It's a room tile that gives you points for not having any weapons or going on any expeditions. So it's just
a peaceful dwarf family.
Yes.
Even that gets points.
Yes. Having a giant dwarf family.
Yes, having 5, I think, is the max. So.
Six total.
No, there could be a 6th dwarf.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's that little token that's not a piece.
Man.
Yeah. So it's a huge game, both physically and gameplay-wise. It's whimsical. It's got like a very whimsical feel to it.
Yeah.
You've got Old Man Rosenberg in the rules, who gives you little like supplemental boxes for like things that you can do in the game.
So cute. I just love that I can say like, my dwarf is going to plow a field and he's gonna get some corn. It's so cute.
And there's a lot of detail thrown in. Like each of the on the player board, there's like little crows flying over like certain parts of your fields, and you can flip the player board over to play at night, even though it has no gameplay difference whatsoever. It's just the farm and cave are at nighttime rather than daytime.
Yeah. Though I think he tried that once and lost. So
yeah, I'm never playing nighttime again. But yeah, it's small details. I mean, the game has a huge footprint on the table. You've got your action board, which, based on the number of players you're playing with, will get bigger or smaller. You have like different boards. So if you're playing with like a full 7 people, you play with different boards than if you're playing with 2 people, or with additional boards, I should say. If you're playing with 5 people, there's this thin little board that you put in between the 2 larger boards that provide additional actions. And it's very clear that a lot of thought went into the design of this game, even though it is very similar to Agricola. A lot of thought went into how to make the biggest, most accessible possible game while still retaining a very complex strategic depth to it.
I also love that you shuffle the action cards within each round too, or within certain rounds, so you don't necessarily know which one's coming up.
Yeah, every game will be different. So basically the deck of action cards that go to fill in the end of the action board will be different, come out in a different order every game. So one strategy you may have to not use right away in one game versus another game, which is kind of cool. So yeah, it's a giant sort of world full of possibilities. And going back to the components real quick, I love games that are a tactile game experience that there's bits and pieces that you get to touch and hold in your hand, and this game is just gobs of them, like just a handful of vegetables or a handful of pigs or
like if there's one phase in the game where there's a breeding phase, and so like you have a pair of sheep on your farm and they make a baby sheep, and you can go to the box and pull out like an actual sheep, like in a component that looks like a sheep. It's not just like a white token, like they actually look like sheep.
Yeah, it's and the wood looks like little branches, and the stones look like arrowheads. It's like the amount of detail and thought that went into the game. It makes it a very satisfying game to play. Some games are really great, like in the head, like in your mind when you play them, but on the table they're just kind of meh. You could have an equally fun time playing it on Vassal and not touching it. I feel like Caverna is a game you have to touch, you have to feel, you have to like hold and use, and it's that's the best part of board games is they're a physical object, they're not digital.
Right.
So this is a great example of that.
For sure.
It's like a filling meal for your hands.
We've played a lot of 2-player of Caverna. So I think we've also played it with 4 players before, and it definitely changed the experience. So I'm sure if we even got like a full 7-player experience going, it would scale up pretty well. That's
one of the things I like actually, is that it feels like a different game when you have different player counts, which is like I feel like very hard to do from a design perspective. But a 2-player game, you can like once you get the game down and know it, you can bust out a game real quick. Hour and a half. 4 players, much different beast. You've got to worry about like what spaces people are going to take, because there's going to be less free spaces for you to take your actions with. So you've really got to like buckle down and identify a strategy that you're going to go after and not deviate too much with it.
Yeah.
Whereas 2 players allows for a little more exploration. So it changes. But I think we've played it mostly 2-player, and I've it's held up really well over the course of multiple plays.
For sure.
Earlier you mentioned resource management, and that's the kind of thinking that goes into this game. There's sort of 2 games. You've got your worker placement action taking strategy, and you've also got your resource management. The game does throw you a little curveball every so often in that you have to feed your family of dwarves, otherwise get negative points for it. So you constantly have to balance, what am I trying to accomplish versus I need to make sure I have enough food or other resources to feed my dwarves so that they don't starve, so that I don't lose points at the end of the game. And that makes it that actually adds tension to the game when okay, I really need to go and get these stone arrowheads. However, I also have to feed my dwarves at the end of this round, so I have to pick either getting the stone and having my dwarves starve, or getting the food and making sure I can get the stone on the next time.
Right. I also like that each action card comes with resources that are placed on it at the beginning of every round. So say a couple turns goes by and we don't pick a specific action, that continues to get resources on it and build up. And so you could quickly go in and grab 5 food off of an action card if it had that.
Or you do what I do, and that's get the room tile that allows your dwarves to eat rocks, and then you can feed them with ore or stone, which is
just one of them. There's just one poor soul in your family that eats rocks.
Go to your room and eat your rocks.
So that's kind of the basics of the game. If you want to get into maybe what we like and what we don't like about it, I guess the number one thing I like about it is all the pieces. I think we've talked about that a little bit before, but it's very thematic. You can quickly glance at other players' boards and see what they're going for. I also love just having looking out over my little dwarf farm and seeing a donkey and then a sheep and all that stuff. I think it's fun.
Absolutely. I could go on and on about the pieces, but I feel like I have already. But they're great. They look great on the table. They're fun to play with.
Yeah. And I know one of the things I always gravitate towards in games is the story you can tell when you're done with it. So the fact that at the end of the game, after scoring is all done, you can look and say well, my dwarf has 3 ruby mines and some donkeys in his ore mines, and but he has maybe 1 field with 2 sheep on it, whereas your board might have
85 dogs.
A bunch of dogs and
that's it.
And
just dogs.
Just
the
dogs.
army of dogs. You'd think I was an Alaskan Iditarod racer.
Or you're breeding them for something. I don't know, breed dogs and you feed your dwarves rocks. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it's too bad I can't feed them dogs. That would solve all my problems.
That's terrible.
Well, I know. The game won't allow you to feed your dwarves dogs, which is unfortunate.
No, that's very fortunate and a good move.
Oh, okay.
He's crazy.
Speaking of fortunate, unfortunate, you just dig a mine 3 ruby mines deep like some greedy sort of dwarf. You're lucky that there's no rules for a Balrog to come out and destroy your home.
That's a totally different game.
I really like the strategic planning and the number of options that you have in this game. You always feel like you're sort of can do something substantial and worthwhile on your turn. Like I said, it's a sandbox. You can try all sorts of different things. You can build all sorts of different rooms. I mean, the last time we played, I basically neglected my farm and just tried a whole different combination of room tiles in my cavern, along with mines. And I didn't really have any animals except for my 85 dogs. But I had a lot of donkeys who are allowed to work in your mines. So I had a bunch of mules in the mines and lots of rubies. I was focusing in on the rubies, using those rubies, turning those in for other resources, for food, and other rewards. So it's a lot of strategy. You could play this game probably a dozen times and try something completely different each time and still be in the mix to win it at the end, I would say. So that's probably my favorite part, is the versatility of the game. And I'll go again, I like the pieces. I can't say that enough.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of that, here's a shot of all the wood in the game pouring into a tray on my table. So, things that you dislike about this game. I feel like we've been pretty glowing.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, while I do appreciate the scalability of the game from however many players you have, I feel like since we played the 2-player version quite often, I'm a little frustrated by the fact that there aren't more action cards to choose from. You kind of know, once you've played it several times, you know what's coming up, which is good in that you can get your head around a strategy and you know what cards are coming up, but then There's also like a little room for variety, I think. So it'd be kind of nice if there were maybe a couple extra action cards to choose from.
I totally agree. I want, as variable as the gameplay is, the setup to the game is not so variable. And like you, I wish there was like a deck of action cards and you would pick 9 out of there. Like maybe even just 30. If there were 30 action cards and then you would pick the 9 that you would play with, that would come out during the course of the game. I just feel like...
But then again, maybe they tried that and it didn't scale well, but still. Like...
I don't know. I think when you see expansions for Caverna, I think that's the very first thing you're going to see in them is the action cards that you set up at the beginning of the game that you flip over as you go through. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a great game, don't get me wrong. You're right though, it does start to feel a little stale knowing that, okay, well, in the first 3 turns, I know that blacksmithing is going to come out, or the mining, not blacksmithing, the mine development action is going to come out. So, you know, that's one downside, I guess, is that that element of the game starts to feel really samey really quickly.
And this might come as a shock to you, but another dislike is all the pieces. Just setting up the game alone is a nightmare. There's a really great thread on Board Game Geek, actually, that he sent me since I got Caverna, of a great storage solution. I don't know how I would set this up if I didn't have that, so definitely check it out if you have it.
It uses Plano boxes that actually fit inside the box, so when you close the box, it looks fine. You don't have to store any components outside the game box, but inside is a couple of Plano boxes filled with all the wooden bits and cardboard tiles.
But if you're just going off of the bags, it can be so tedious going from the bag to the board, and because you have to refill the action cards every time, plus you're constantly exchanging resources, so if you don't have a good setup, it can be a little frustrating.
Yeah,
and it takes away from gameplay time.
It does. Its setup is easily setup and breakdown, I would say, is probably like 20 to 30 minutes combined total.
Oh, for sure.
The other thing I don't like, and you mentioned that the sheer number of pieces in the organizational structure, there is one small quibble I have, and I know this is kind of like, oh, well, like, what have you done for me lately? But in a game where every single wooden piece is
thematic
like
and appropriately
cut and colored and themed as what it is, little stalks of wheat, little pumpkins for vegetables, tiny donkeys, dogs, pigs, sheep, and cows, little wooden branches and stone arrowheads, you couldn't make the player dwarf pieces anything else but a wooden disc. They're like
I know,
tiny wooden discs.
Where's the dwarf?
You couldn't give me like a little dwarf meeple or even like a little plastic dwarf miniature. I mean, it just seems like a gross oversight that you have such a thematic looking game that's so fun to play with, and then the actual pieces that are the most important, the ones you take actions with, are like flat UFOs. Like, what is that all about? Give me a dwarf. Come on, give me a dwarf.
Yeah, that and the money pieces too are a little bit like, what are these? Like, what are these? I don't get it.
Yeah, a little bit afterthoughty.
Yeah, but
I mean, that's a small complaint. That should not take away from the game. It just stands out as something that is...
It's odd.
Yeah, it is very odd that is the way it is. It stands out as something more so because everything else is excellent and not so much because it's awful in and of itself.
Yeah, and the fact that the game is Caverna, like cave farmers, and then the cave farmers in the game that you use are little wooden discs.
Yeah.
What?
I would say the other thing that is tough, especially for new players, is it's really hard to nail down sort of a path to victory early on. You really have to take in a full game, even a full 2 games, to really understand where the points come from and the flow of the turns and what your opponent is trying to do before you can really say, okay, this game I'm going to try and win by doing X.
Right.
And so you're really going to have to experiment with the game a couple times to... truly comprehend sort of the deeper level of victory, not just like, oh, I know these give me points at the end of the game, therefore I should have them, but more so the balance of those things. How many animals should I have versus how many rooms should I develop, or mines, or all of that kind of stuff. So
right. So when you're playing the game and you're going along, like sometimes you can be 4 turns in there and you're like, okay, like I got it, like I know what strategy I'm going for, but by then, you know, the player you're playing against is already like, he's already figured out his strategy and is like well on his way to scoring like 30 points more than you. So
it's like trying to steer a boat, a really big cruise ship. It doesn't turn. Changing strategies mid-course is really hard because the ship doesn't turn very fast, and so you're like struggling.
And especially if you don't have a strategy at all, so you're kind of just like you're sort of getting points and you're sort of doing a little bit. You can't really do a little bit of everything in this game. You really have to early on, I think, say like, okay, I'm going for this and stick to it.
It also suffers a little bit from a runaway leader syndrome. It's really hard to catch up if someone is like clobbering you. Like if you see they have like 8 of every animal, it's going to be really hard to overcome that no matter what you do. You can kind of see the writing on the wall.
Right, 'cause especially depending on what special rooms they get, you can kind of see what strategies they're going for, but it's very hard to dissuade them from doing certain actions and also making up for the fact that you're running behind. So that's a little frustrating, I think, for some new players.
Yeah, I feel like there are some negatives here that I think if you're not the right type of gamer could irk you more than maybe games we've reviewed in the past that have negatives. Overall, I enjoy this game a lot. It's not something I would play like every single time, but it's fun to bust it out every couple of weeks if I really want like a peaceful strategy game, because it does satisfy so many other gaming things that I love. Nice bits, good like thinky, without being overwhelming, and has the right amount of length to it. But there are some things that kind of little
you're like
little negative. Yeah.
Makes you kind of like just go
That's why I give Caverna the Cave Farmers 1.5 newborn wooden cows out of 2.
Really? Wow. 1.5 newborn cows. That sounds kind of like some weird mutation
Hopefully
thing.
that's the delicious half.
Yeah.
Feel.
Never gonna live that one down. I still give it 2 cows. I mean, I still find it. I mean, the theme. I love the theme. It's elegantly designed. I really appreciate that. I love the scalability of it. I feel like you could bust it out at a game night and people would like the theme, and I think they would get the game pretty easily. Though it would take a really long time to play, depending on the crowd you have. So
that's another downside.
Yeah, or an upside, depending on whatever you're looking for. But so I would still give it 2 cows up. I don't. The wooden disc as a dwarf doesn't bother me that much that I have to chop off the cow. So that's good.
All right, well there you have it. That is Caverna the Cave Farmers from Uwe Rosenberg and Lookout Games.